Good morning, good afternoon, good day, good night, wherever you are on the planet. This is John Dupuy, and this is Spiritual Technologies 2.0. And we're about halfway into this group of interviews with these magnificent people, and it's really been expanding and inspiring me, and really changing. I'm just expanded in the way I look at my work and what I'm doing in the world, and the connections we made. So we're continuing on, and we have the honor and the privilege to have with us Dr. Julia Mossbridge. And good morning, Julia.
Hello, hello.
And we also have, as always, we have Javi Otero, who is the CTO of iAwake Technologies, and he's coming to us from darkest Spain. No, Asturias, Spain. And I'm John Dupuy, the CEO of iAwake Technologies from lusciously light-filled southern Utah. And we'll get on with this. And before we start, I want to read, Julie, I'd like to read your bio, just so the people that don't know your work and haven't heard you speak or teach before will have an idea what we're getting into here. Okay, so Julia Mossbridge, MA, PhD, is a visiting scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, the CEO and research director of Mossbridge Institute, LLC, and a visiting scholar in the psychology department at Northwestern University. She is best known for being the inventor of Choice Compass, which is based on a patent-pending process that helps smartphone users tap into their mind-body connection via their heart rhythms as they contrast to life choices. Her research interest is primarily to understand how time is perceived by the conscious and subconscious minds. This has led her to examine aspects of both cognitive and perceptual timing, e.g., order effects on reading comprehension, perpetual integration across senses, as well as reverse temporal effects she has analyzed in recent meta-analysis that was covered by ABC News, 2020, Wall Street Journal, Ideas Market, and Fox News, and other mainstream media outlets. Wow, you've been busy. And
some of that was me, and then the rest other people wrote about. So
I want to ask you a personal question first, but maybe you can just summarize what has been the main thrust of your professional work into the field of consciousness as you understand it today, and realize that you may have a different understanding in 2 years as this thing unfolds. But yeah, where are you at, and how did you get here?
Oh, okay. Where I'm at is I am fascinated that consciousness. I'm fascinated that consciousness research has so dominated our thinking lately in the world of neuroscience and in psychology, and outside that world. People are fascinated by it without very much discussion of what we are not conscious of. So we are conscious of, this much, and we are not conscious of this much.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference. And so the relationship between the conscious and the non-conscious, the conscious mind or the conscious processes that are going on and all the non-conscious processes that are going on is what's really fascinating to me. And I approach that relationship specifically because I have a lifelong interest that's, what was I going to say was very interested, but that's kind of boring. So I have a lifelong interest in understanding time and how it works, because for many reasons, but one is that since I was a kid, I would have these dreams that seemed to correspond to future events so precisely that I started, my father was a physicist, my mom and her partner were both therapists. And so I knew about psychology and I knew about science, and I knew that I could be making up the correspondence between, my dream of a friend losing her watch on the playground and the actual event. So I went out and got a journal, and I started writing down my dreams so I could look and see, okay, did I make this up? Did I actually have that dream after I would experience something? And in fact, sometimes I had made it up, and other times it was a really precise dream about a future event that I couldn't have predicted or through normal means. And so I started to think that maybe time doesn't work the way we think it does, that maybe our conscious minds have an opinion about time that doesn't necessarily reflect the opinion about time that's held by the non-conscious processes. So in other words, we're only conscious of what we can be conscious of. And then there's this ocean of non-conscious processes, and they may be seeing things in a very different way. And I started to get fascinated by that idea. And so long story short, I ended up looking into how non-conscious processes may be accessing essentially the future, or what we call the future with our conscious minds.
Yeah, and how that can possibly happen. Could you give us kind of your thumbnail working definition of consciousness? So it's kind of, different people are saying different things.
Yeah, so I call it same thing as people would call qualia, so experience. So conscious processes or conscious mind or the conscious things are the things that I experience.
Okay, so that it's
things of which I am aware.
Okay, so it's a consciousness is a capacity to be aware and to experience. Could we say it that way?
Well, I don't know if it's the capacity, because I have the capacity to be aware and experience when I'm in deep sleep, but I'm not being aware and experiencing. You see what I mean? So I think consciousness is the experiencing and the being aware. Let's say consciousness is the state of experiencing and being aware. That's how I'm defining it.
Okay, the state of experiencing. Yeah, that works. So what do I know I'm a musician and I meditate a lot. And in my early years, I experimented with psychedelics. And so I completely know experientially from what you're talking about that time seems to really have different relationships depending on what's going on in my noggin. Okay. I would go on LSD trips and it seemed like I went through 5 lifetimes. Within a few hours. And when I'm really in a flow state teaching or playing music or writing, it can seem like a long period of time. It's just very brief, so there's this constant kind of relative experiencing how we experience time. At least I do in my life.
Yeah, so definitely different substances. I've never experimented with psychedelics because, or really like very many drugs at all. Because when I was a kid, I got a book about the brain and fell in love with it and the neuroanatomy. And I was so impressed by it that I thought, I don't want to do anything that could jeopardize this. And I got pretty scared of that. So I only hear this from other people, and I study the literature, a self-report about what happens in those states. I absolutely believe, because a lot of it is highly consistent with what you're saying. And in the flow state, I've certainly experienced that as well. And so I think that is I think when you're in a flow state, in fact, I just read a study this morning before I was stealing a few peeks at it before I came to this interview, in which they were sort of reviewing creativity, the neural circuitry that their neural activity that seems to be co-occurring with creative insight. And there seems to be sort of this relationship between the parts of our brain that we kind of consider the default mode or the self-referential network, or when we're thinking about ourselves, we're really not kind of doing much. We're not in task mode. Mm-hmm. And then the task mode part that's like on target, trying to be focused, trying to get something done. And both of them are in this two-way street relationship during creative insight. And that's also a thing called a flow state. And so it suggests to me it's almost like a friendly relationship between processes that we generally relate to non-conscious or out of our control processes, daydreaming, that kind of thing, mm-hmm. and processes where you're really trying to do something with your mind, or we consider that's a conscious effort I'm making. There is this beautiful emerging, at least the evidence for this relationship is emerging, suggesting that the unconscious mind and the conscious mind are in collaboration to create our experience. And that's our experience of time, and that's our experience of space, it's our experience of each other, relationship, ourselves. But there's this collaboration. And so I want to tell a brief story about that. One time I was I was my massage therapist. I was very relaxed, and she knows my son, and I was trying to tell her I was proud of my son and wanted to brag about him, but I wanted to brag about his debate tournament and the topic that they chose, which was that maybe towns should not subsidize stadiums for sports, right? Mm-hmm. And I couldn't think of the word subsidize. So I said to her, that word where you put the taxes towards something, but maybe it shouldn't go towards that thing, but you're like underwriting it, you know. And she's like, I don't know what you mean. And so here's the words that I thought of. My unconscious mind gives me empathize, I think, and I go, oh, it starts with an E. My unconscious mind goes empathize and eulogize. Over and over again. It's like empathize, eulogize, empathize, eulogize. And I'm like, yeah, it starts with an E, but it's not empathize or eulogize. And finally I come up with subsidize. And I realize my unconscious mind was being very kind because my conscious mind had an opinion that it started with an E. But it didn't start with an E. So the non-conscious mind is like, well, she thinks it starts with an E, so we're just going to give her something that ends with the right suffix, the silent suffix, and that'll remind her of the word the other way. I mean, it's just like incredible. So it struck me that there is a friendly, compassionate, almost parental relationship between our non-conscious processes, which essentially have more access to what's going on in the world than our conscious minds, and our conscious awareness, which is almost childlike, like we're going to see things in a very simple way, and this is the way that it is, and we're going to believe that this story is true. And so the non-conscious mind doesn't burst that bubble, but does sort of feed us information that's useful for us. So I think that's what's going on with time as well. So the conscious mind has this opinion that we don't see into the future, right? But we can remember the past. When in reality, we have a really hard time remembering the past. We often falsely remember the past. Mm-hmm. And we consciously have a difficult time looking into the future. But when we get non-conscious processing through physiology or through experiments that get information from non-conscious processing, we get information about the future. So our conscious opinion of the way time works is just not borne out by the other sources of information we have. Does that make sense? I know it was like a lot in a small period of time.
No, that's great. You just keep on going. You know, one time I was in a deep meditative experience. I had the insight about time, and this was the insight that the self does not exist in time, self with a big S, but time is a dimension that emerges from the self.
Yeah, if the self is like sort of global consciousness or global self rather than individual self, I would agree.
Yeah. Ultimate, essential self, the self that, you know, that the whole relative world emerges from moment to moment. You know, the original phase before the Big Bang, all that kind of stuff. And that place that we reach in deep meditation when we can slow all the conscious processes down and get them out of the way, and we finally just rest in that emptiness.
That makes sense to me. The confusion that I generally have when people use terms like consciousness or self for the big versus the little is that they're the same word, so it's easy to confuse them.
Yeah, we just use big S, little s. That's kind of the way we get around it.
So differently from our little s self that it almost shouldn't be called the same thing.
Yeah, well, when I went to graduate school, it was transpersonal psychology, and they told us our job was to screw the inscrutable and F the ineffable. So when we talk about these things, you know, it's kind of difficult, but good poets or transmitters or teachers, we can, you know, sometimes, you know, transmit a kind of insight into these other states of being.
I was just very curious about that relationship that you mentioned about the conscious processes and the unconscious ones. And I was just wondering if there are any ways in which people could explore that relationship further, or maybe that informed your you know, the app that we're going to talk about later, or, you know, I just want to know more about that.
Yeah, good. So the language around this is a little difficult because they're all non-conscious. Again, all brain processes, you know, if we were conscious of our brain processes, there would be no neuroscience research, right? Because we would just say, well, you know, notice that when you're looking at the color green, those particular neurons are firing. So that's how you see green, right? I mean, if we were neuroscience, but we're not aware of all that. So all of them are non-conscious. But I'm just going to define my terms here. So when I'm talking about conscious processing, I'm talking about processing in the brain that's correlated with conscious awareness. Okay. And when I talk about non-conscious or unconscious processing, and I'm going to equate them here, I'm going to say that is processing in the brain that is generally not correlated with conscious awareness.
Somehow there are parts of me that know more about myself and that can guide me. For example, working with dreams or any other technologies. It doesn't matter. So I was wondering if your research into time and this relationship between conscious and non-conscious processes goes somewhere around this place that I'm trying to describe.
Yes. So let's talk about I. So we talk about I as our conscious awareness. Mm-hmm. This is I experienced this, and then I fell asleep, and I don't remember anything from when I didn't dream, but I do remember my dreams. That's essentially, we're equating I with conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But regardless of whether you're a New Age person or a metaphysician or post-materialist or a hard-nosed neuroscientist, every single one of those categories of people has an opinion that something other than the I is in control of the contents of the I, right? If you're a neuroscientist, you say, well, the brain is in control of this thing we're calling the I, right? And if you're a mystic or a post-materialist or a metaphysician, you often think that there's some kind of higher consciousness that's in charge of the contents of this I. So basically, we all kind of agree without saying it out loud because it's scary that we're puppets, okay? So that the I, the conscious awareness, is like a puppet. And that the puppet master, the hand, right, is the argument is over what the puppet master is. Is it some universal consciousness, or is it the cells in your brain?
Right.
But that we are puppets, everyone essentially agrees without saying it. And what I'm interested in is people don't say it because it's scary, because it threatens, the ego, which is the puppet. Mm-hmm. Which is fascinating, because if the puppet is the contents of the puppet's experience, including the fear of being threatened, including the fear of the ego being threatened, is if the contents are all controlled by the puppet master, this suggests a very interesting relationship between the puppet and the puppet master, right? So this suggests that the conscious awareness is being told to have the experience of wanting to have its own free will.
Do you think that the puppet can become more aware?
Well, so if you really, again, this is the belief across. I have yet to find a mystical tradition that doesn't end up in the realization that something else is controlling the puppet, right? Mm-hmm. So what does it mean for the puppet to become more aware? It means the thing that's controlling the puppet makes it feel like it's more aware.
But it's not really. Well, but what if the puppet becomes more aware of what's controlling it? Isn't that deepening awareness in a real way?
Think of a puppet and a puppet master. Mm-hmm. I know this is hard to get because we don't want to get it. But think of a puppet and a puppet master. If you take the puppet off, there's nothing.
Yep.
Right? And so like deep sleep, you take the puppet off. It's got nothing. It's got no experience. You put the puppet back on, you wake up. You take it off. Who's taking the puppet on and off? Well, it's not us. Right?
It's not the puppet.
It's not the puppet. And so then, so let's talk about who us or who we are. When we identify ourselves with the puppet by saying, I am my individual conscious awareness, we have no control. But I think what you're talking about when you're talking about becoming more aware, I think what you're talking about is identifying yourself not just with the puppet, but saying, maybe this puppet master, maybe this is part of me too. And once I start saying that I, like you were saying, Javi, you were saying, when I started to realize that some part of me knew more about me than me, it seemed to me what you were saying was, maybe I'm this part too, not just the puppet. Maybe I is bigger than the puppet, right?
And I was looking at some of your former lectures on YouTube, and you begin to discuss non-duality and non-dual awareness. That's when you start becoming aware of both puppet and puppet master.
You don't deny the puppet. The puppet exists, and there's a good reason for the puppet. But you start to say, there's this whole thing here. I had a Kabbalistic teacher once who told me, this is how we, as seekers, we spend our lives like this, and we're here, right? We think we're here. And we're like, oh, if only I could get over here. If only I could get over there. And then at some point we start to unravel and go, oh, it's right there. It's part of me.
Yeah, everything gets bigger.
Yeah, and so that's, to me, non-dual awareness. So what that has to do with my research is I am all about trying to peek behind the veil and to notice what's going on in what we call these unconscious processes, which are essentially, to me, the puppet master. And so that is why I got very interested in creating my app. That's why I've done the research on time, looking into the future using physiology, which, sometimes we're conscious of our physiology, but often we're not. So using physiology as a measure of the puppet master.
Mm-hmm.
So just to describe, because I'm motivated to understand what sort of is going on behind the scenes and what the world sort of looks like to the non-conscious mind, or to, as we discussed, sort of the puppet master idea. I was very interested in Dean Radin's work on, which showed that physiology, including heartbeat, skin conductance, changes in breathing, actually indicate the emotional status of upcoming events that should not be predictable according to usual means. So that's an awkward scientific way of saying, essentially predict the future even when it shouldn't be predictable.
Right.
So the kind of experiment that we're talking about is having people sit in front of a computer and having a random number generator provide images or sounds that are unpredictable. Some are just beautiful images of a seashore, and others are very emotional images. They might be erotic or they might be violent. And, for decades, we've known that erotic images or violent images will produce changes in physiology after the image is shown. And for decades, people have been showing that by baselining, in other words, subtracting out essentially all the activity prior to when the stimulus is shown, because we all know, of course, that no change can occur before the stimulus is shown. We're just going to, call that the baseline activity. All the change should be after the stimulus is shown. And then Dean came and said, well, what if we looked before the stimulus is shown and didn't subtract that out?
Right.
And he showed the significant difference between physiology preceding events that are emotional versus non-emotional in well randomized experiments. So I looked at that and I was like, that's amazing and revolutionary. I want to see if I can get those results myself in the lab. And at the time I was a postdoc at Northwestern, and I asked around and said, I was in a wonderful lab, and I said, do you think it's reasonable to do this experiment? And my postdoc advisor said, no question should be left unanswered if you're fascinated by it. And I said, okay,
nice.
good.
I like that.
Yeah, it's great advice. So, so I built the experiment just essentially the same way he had done it, and found the result. So I was impressed. So then I tried again, found it again, and I also started noticing a gender difference in this result. So, and then I talked with Dean, and he had noticed the gender difference too. So then I pulled together a bunch of studies and did a statistical analysis with Jessica Utz and Patrizio Tresoldi. So Jessica Utz is, I think she's the president of the Statistical Association of America or something. She's kind of this amazing statistician. She's at UC Irvine. And Patrizio Tresoldi is a psychologist from Italy. And we put together this meta-analysis, which is a statistical analysis of all these kinds of studies. And we took a conservative look at the data, and it appears that when you take all the data together, this effect really replicates. So then I said, well, people would can criticize these data. There's some resistance to this because, again, people don't like it. I think the resistance comes from a deep psychological place where people don't like it when you say this part knows more than the puppet. Your story about how time works is not accurate. That's not something people generally like to hear. So I've found. So the one criticism was, well, there could be some kind of weird order effects, which means that maybe these pictures or sounds were given to people in a certain order that was maybe predictable in some way, so their physiology predicted them. And that's not a bad idea, except that over 26 experiments with, more than a couple, I don't know, more than 500, I don't know, I'd have to go back and calculate, a ton of participants, all with randomized orders. It would be a little shocking if all of them had some particular order, or many of them had a particular order that produced this. But anyway, you sort of go, and in academia, it takes years to answer critics. So I decided, look, I'll I'll just do the experiment where I look at the first trial. And I'm only going to throw away all the other trials. I'm going to look at the first trial. So about half of the people will receive an emotional experience, right? And half of the people will receive kind of a neutral or pleasant experience, right? Because this is randomized. And so I'm just going to compare the physiology before the first trial. So there's nothing to learn. There's no order of events. There's, no problem with the randomization. And if you compare the first trials, you still get the effect and you still get the gender difference. So I did that in the lab, and then I decided to see if it replicated with hundreds of people using a smartphone application. So I went and built a smartphone application that looked at heart activity through the webcam, and that's the commercial version of that is Choice Compass, which we'll talk about in a bit. And that smartphone app, I built this research version, essentially, that had people record their heart activity before they learned whether they were going to win money, right? And so half of the people won the money, half of the people didn't win the money. And again, the same effect replicated. So it's just one trial. It's not multiple trials. The same effect replicated and the same gender difference replicated.
Were women more prone to have this kind of ability to sense the coming event?
Yes, isn't that funny? Everyone says that, right? I gave a talk at
what you're saying, you're talking in science, right? But most of us know this stuff from just our experience of being alive. We can trust our guts. Sometimes we know we're being watched. I mean, this stuff is happening all the time.
Right, but this is a way in which we're wrong. So I was at the Science and Non-Duality meeting, and I gave my talk, and then I was on a panel with Deepak Chopra. And he said, yes, and you showed that women are better at this. And I was like, no, in fact, the data, which people don't like to hear, because again, it's different than our intuition, the data are exactly opposite. So at least for this kind of task, which is winning money, okay, men are far and away better predictors of the
So
task.
let me say, so greedy bastards are better at predicting if there's money coming in than kind of sweet, intuitive, caring, sensitive women.
All I can say is that men seem to get more excited before they win. And in the lab, when I would do the experiment, it wasn't winning money. It was being correct at guessing something at which they had 50% chance to guess. Mm-hmm. No, at that point, it was 25% chance to guess. And the men were just their arousal levels were they were twice as high as those of women. And very predictive of the future being correct. So in other words, a man who was about to be correct was like already ramping up and getting excited about 10 seconds before they actually found out if they were correct on something that they shouldn't have been able to predict. Whereas if they were about to not be correct, they were like, not that excited. And then the thing happened and they found out they weren't correct. And that's the same kind of thing I found with the heartbeat. In the smartphone app. So if I redid it, so according to your theory, it's because they're greedy, but it could be they're more intuitive.
That's one explanation. Yeah. You can frame it in a good way, or depending how you're feeling about men.
Exactly.
Moment, right?
Right. Yeah. But
just because I'm a man doesn't mean I'm always feeling good about men. Trust me.
Yeah, and same goes for women. Certainly women. I don't think we can make any clear and useful generalizations about men or women, but the data seem to consistently show that there's this predictive thing that happens with either being right or with money. According to your theory, if we wanted to really make men feel bad, we could do one where you predict whether a donation is made to a nonprofit charity, and then if women are better at predicting that, then we can just say, look, women are morally superior, but we can't. But I'm not going to do that experiment.
Yeah, you'll just let us guess about it instead of confirming it, right? Okay, that's good.
I think that's dangerous. And frankly, it's better to show that men are good at this stuff because men will pay attention to it. So that's always useful in science. But anyway, so now I'm attempting to replicate that one with a $4. So I started with a $2 reward, and so I ran 300 people. Now I've got, I think, about 300 people for the $4 reward, and then I'm going to do a $6 reward. And my goal is to show or determine whether there is some kind of dose response curve. So you would think people would get more excited about $6 than $2. So maybe their anticipation, maybe this sort of look into the future would also ramp up. So that's where that research is at. And It's pretty consistent. It's pretty clear. I feel like if I were studying some kind of a drug for, Abbott Labs or Pfizer, they'd be like, wow, you discovered a drug that really works well and consistently, and the statistics are great, and let's send this drug out into the world. But because it's this other effect that is counterintuitive to our daily experience, there's a little harder road that I have ahead of me in terms of talking to people about it. And anyone who does research will tell you the same thing.
Excellent. You want to, I could just go on with this. So much interesting stuff there, and one of the things, I'll just say this, one of the things that science actually does is it makes the formerly unconscious conscious. It objectifies the processes. So by being aware of the processes, you're beginning to become a little less unconscious. Now, we were talking with Julia Mossbridge, I believe, from Mind Mirror. And she was, it was really interesting stuff. And she was showing me how these brainwaves and the patterns they get into when she calls it supermind thing. And I totally experienced that stuff. And now it gave, by knowing that, I knew a little bit about it, but now that I know the latest iteration of this, when I'm actually doing my interior work, somehow it helps me be a little more aware of the kind of practice that I need to do to get into the most beneficial state to work on whatever I'm working on. So it's very useful. And Ken Wilber used to say, when you're these memes, these levels, mimetic levels in developmental psychology, that the lower ones, it's all about me. The higher ones, it starts to be about the tribe, the world, the cosmos, etc. That you can't be aware of that in meditation. You're not aware that your thoughts are arriving from your particular level of development until, my point is, you become aware of the level of developments, and you go, oh, that's a very green thought. Oh, that's a very primitive, tribal thought, or something like that. So it's like, by making this unconscious stuff. When I'm practicing tennis, for example, working on my serve, I can almost feel the dendrites and the myelin sheath beginning to form, and I just have this kind of feeling that that my brain is refiguring itself through my practice, and that's how the objective science helps the inner subjective experience of meditation or being alive or moving through the world. Methinks.
Methinks too. I as the scientist, I want to have toss caveats into everything you just said, but I agree with it sort of at an experiential level. So a caveat is, it's easy to say, well, now I experience my dendrites changing or my myelin sheaths changing as I learn something, but you don't really know that you could also be making that up. So right.
You're right, and maybe the power of visualizations actually, a feedback loop that's helping that to actually happen.
Well, who knows? Right, exactly. Who knows? And I think that's why I think it's important to have this really clear relationship between the objective, or what we call objective.
Absolutely.
Objective, but what we call objective science and subjective experience, because subjective experience is critical and in fact basically the only thing we have, but everything is filtered through it. And then this sort of shared discussion about what's really going on in the world out there, this scientific discussion about that is critical too, because you can easily go nuts sitting and thinking that you understand everything that's going on, and you can get delusional, and that's not cool. Right. And so I feel like that part of, the yogis warn about that in meditation, right? If you get carried away by watching these processes, it's not going to be good for you. So you're really trying to even watch the processes that are watching the processes and that are labeling the processes, or that's a tribal thought, or that's a this thought. Those are also processes.
Right. So and if you just stick with the scientific, you develop some kind of dissociative disorder, and you're just so lost in that you forgot what it is to be alive and be a human. So with both of these sides of the street informing one another, then we get something that's really deeply human and deeply cool, and honors both sides of us that are very essential.
Exactly. And so that's sort of the ongoing theme in all of my work, right? So it's like the puppet and the puppet master. You don't deny the puppet, and you don't deny the puppet master, right? The conscious and the non-conscious, you don't deny either. You develop the relationship between them, right? And so that's what motivated me. That's, in terms of what you said about feeling like you can make the unconscious more conscious, it does feel that way. I have that experience too. And that's part of why I developed Choice Compass, is I wanted people to have almost a short circuit bit of information to their bodies to their superconscious, or the part of them that may have some wisdom, or whatever we want to call it, intuition for them, so that eventually you could throw the app away and you could just know what it feels like in your body when something is a good choice and when something is a bad choice.
I wanted to, this is kind of a good transition to talk about the app, because I was using it last night in preparation for this, and I was dealing with something that's a super important kind of life, soul level, existential, however you want to call the decision. And I would do it, I put, here's the app, and, this is a smartphone, and you put your non-dominant index finger, or I don't know, I was going to say
Are you left-handed?
Yes, I am. So that explains a lot too. And so then you hit the start button, and you think about the one choice, what it would be, what all the issues are, and what are the feelings that emerge. And it counts off for about 40 seconds, I think, something like that. And then you do it again with the second choice, and you do the same thing. You're with what's involved, what are the feelings, what are the issues, and then you hit it when you hit another button, and then it kind of shows you. Think the preferable choice is choice 1 or choice 2. Is that a simple explanation of what's going on? Just in how to use it.
That's how it appears to the user, is exactly that. You put in 2 choices. Usually they're contrasting choices. So 2 good life choices would be like, should I go back to school, or should I go get a new job if I want to change in my career, right? Should it be school or a job? Bad choices that don't make sense to put in there is like, should I go shopping, or should I marry my best friend? Like, they're just not.
They've got to be related somehow, yeah.
So you put those 2 choices in that you're pondering, and you record your heart rhythm exactly as you said. And then in the back end, can I tell you what's going on in the back end?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so the way I tested this app is I had hundreds of people online go and put their finger on that webcam, and I recorded their heart activity over the internet. And I recorded it while they were viewing 2 contrasting videos that showed extremely poor choices. Like, I choose to be miserable, I choose to be lonely. Like, no one would think, oh, that's a good choice, right? So a video that's about 40 to 50 minutes long of the poor choices, and then a contrasting video of, I choose to be healthy, I choose to have friends, I choose to enjoy my life. Then they put their finger on the webcam during that video, and then I looked for mathematical regularities. So it was very empirical, in the sense that I was just looking for mathematical regularities between the heart rhythms in the contrasting choices. And I was aware of decades of research, especially the research done by the HeartMath Institute, showing that heart rhythms are related to mood. So I knew that there would be something there. But in fact, the regularities that are found are different than those that HeartMath found there, because we're dealing with a different thing here. We're dealing with choices, and we're dealing with a shorter time frame. And again, I found a gender difference, actually, and that seemed to be consistent over 4 experiments. And I was real surprised by that, but I shouldn't have been, based on my past research. And so I ended up creating 2 mathematical algorithms for good and bad, based on the gender difference. So now I encourage people, when they're using the app, I think I'm going to no longer even talk about the gender difference, because that freaks people out. I think I'm just going to call it type 1 and type 2, because some women, especially after menopause, when the hormones change, are more like the male algorithm, and some men, especially those that meditate, who are sort of less testosterone filled, are more like the female algorithm. So I'm just going to say, everyone calibrate it for yourself, and here's how to calibrate it. So that's the next update version that I'm going to put out. So behind the scenes, what it's really doing is taking your heart rhythms and saying, which one of these looks more like a joyful heart rhythm based on those hundreds of people.
Well, in my case, it was like a 0.1% difference.
Mm-hmm. So you have to do it more than once.
Yeah. And I'm really still struggling with it. I can just feel it in my body. It's like one,
Well, did you calibrate it? In other words, did you figure out if you're on the male or the female algorithm?
Well, we put it on the male.
Okay.
No, but I didn't calibrate it. I mean, Pam just assumed, get the male one, and gave it to me, so.
I don't know. If you've done a lot of meditation and stuff, and the way you've been talking about meditation, My experience with almost all meditators who've done it for more than a couple of years, if they're men, is that they're more like the female algorithm. It's just that the testosterone, I think it's the testosterone.
Well, that in itself is a very interesting statement, that you found that people that have been meditating more than a couple of years seem to respond in a much more feminine way to life issues.
Well, I don't know if I want to call it feminine. I think it's almost hormones. I mean, because women who are postmenopausal can be very feminine, but their hormones have changed. I think there's something going on with the balance between progesterone and testosterone. And looking into the literature, it turns out there are, I mean, I didn't know this before I found this gender difference, but I was like, what could explain this? Turns out there are hormonal effects on heart rhythms, even the menstrual cycle and in menopause. So there's something there that I really want to explore. And of course, who has the time? But I'm hoping eventually to be able to explore that.
I've heard studies where men have been given estrogen and women are getting testosterone, and men will be sitting around and you'll start having conversation and they'll start crying, and the women are on testosterone are like, what's the matter with these people?
Yeah.
It's just we really are filtered through our chemical balances or imbalances and
I'm perimenopausal, let me tell you. We're definitely controlled by hormones. Talk about the puppet master. One thing I would love to do.
I think it's like identifying the strings that the puppet master is holding. Okay, all right, there's hormones, right? There's serotonin, there's dopamine, there's my conditioning, there's TV. You start.
Maybe I get enough sleep.
Right. Then you can start finally like making some, independent choices. Hopefully.
Maybe I don't think so.
That would be noble. That would be a noble thing to strive for. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's just more learning how to be the puppet master, how to include the puppet master in awareness. But the one thing I would love to do with you right now, if you want to calibrate it, would be let's do for you, since you do want to use it for a choice that really matters to you, which is really what I was hoping people would use this for. And I get emails from people all the time who actually make decisions based on this. Like, someone wrote me an email and said, I used this when I was trying to figure out which of 3 jobs to take. And I guess he must have done like 1 versus 2 and then 2 versus 3 or something. And then 1 versus 3. And he said he took the new job. He was so delighted. It turned out to be great. And I get emails like that from people a lot. And so people do use it for life decisions. But I always recommend first calibrate, and second, use as much information from any source that you have to make your decision. I would never make a decision based on this alone unless unless intuition is your only option. But the statistics for the testing are pretty
It's come to that. No, it's great. And again, this is a mirror, and then you're flashing back to the puppet here, some information.
Yeah. So let's do a little calibration if you're willing, if you don't think it would.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Okay, so what would be ideal is for you to enter in, so restart it with the little cross in the upper right. We'll restart a new screen. And then in the left side, do you want to type good or bad in the left one? You have a choice.
Okay.
Type good or bad.
Right.
And not even your choice. I'm talking about literally the word good or bad.
Okay.
And then put the other thing in the other one. Yeah, right.
Okay.
So what I'd like you to do, so it's more interesting for people who are watching, if you're willing, I want you to choose. Yeah, that's good. Yep. Yeah. Can people see that? Okay, good. I think so. So then you can dismiss the screen by dropping it down with your finger, and the keyboard.
Okay.
And then what you'll want to do is, as you're keeping your finger on the webcam, choose one of those. It doesn't matter if it's left or right. Choose one, press start, and then out loud, just think about something that's like, let's say you choose bad first. Out loud, tell us something like bad, say bad things, like say things like I choose, and then just bad, any thoughts that come to your head. That
like a bad choice, or just something bad that happens in the world or something like that?
A bad choice. Like maybe you have a bad choice in your past that was bad, or maybe you could just make up a bad choice, like
okay,
rob a bank, and then your thoughts about it. And then
do I have to confess my awful sin in front of everybody?
I don't think you have to do any of that, but you could also choose something that you're willing to confess.
It's like the only really rotten thing I ever did. I'll see. Okay.
It depends. It depends. Just it has to be real. So
it'll be real. All right. I'll just keep it vague enough to protect the guilty.
Exactly. Yeah, right. Perfect. Yeah, you don't want to hurt anybody.
All right.
So go ahead and press start and just tell us what you're thinking through the process.
Okay. I made a decision. I slept with a person that was really not the right thing to do, and I felt really bad.
So
Yeah.
talk more about that.
Well, just the aftertaste, haunted me, and it was a dumb decision, and I was definitely, the puppet was in charge,
Yeah.
and not the moral puppet master, if you will. And so I feel really bad about that. And I've made amends and cleaned it up as much. But yeah, as far as something dishonorable that I did in my life, that was probably it.
So it had a bad impact on you and people around you.
Well, it certainly had a bad impact on me. I mean, there wasn't a big scandal, was it? But it was like just my own sense of honor and rightness, and.
So you didn't feel integrity about it. It was
not.
not.
No, I didn't. No, it was really, really bad.
Okay. Well, that is a good example of a nice calibration choice, because it really didn't work for you.
Right.
It really didn't feel good, and there's no part of you that says, "Oh, that was a great idea." No, it's just not. It was just all around unarguable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
Okay, good. So now where are we at with the time?
On well, I don't know. It didn't say anything.
Well, it has a check mark. So
Yeah.
when there's a check mark, that means that one's done.
Okay.
So let's do the good one. This will be a lot more fun.
Okay. Yeah. We were interviewing a brilliant young man for a part of this thing. Mikey. Oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. Mikey Siegel. What a delightful person.
Oh,
and he said that.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. He said many years ago, when we just started, many years, I mean, 5 or 6 years ago, when we started I Awake, we were at some kind of conference and we had a table, and he started, talking about his interest and this kind of stuff. And I just handed him a whole stack of free CDs. I said, "There you go, brother." And he said that was just such an amazing experience of kindness. And that really, just reinforced where he was going. And I can't totally not remember that. But when I heard it, it made me feel really good. It's like, sometimes, you never know what's going to happen or who you help or a good thing you do, how that will reflect in the world. So.
Yeah, right. And it sounds like you reflected in a really positive way.
Yeah. And it was very spontaneous giving. Obviously, we were just having a conversation, and it wasn't something I was pre-planned to be a great guy or something. It was just a moment.
It just felt like, here I am acting in the flow, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. And here you go. And this is a lovely young man. And here.
And talking about Mikey is a great way to feel positive, because he has such a warm heart.
I know.
So that's a good choice for calibration. If you know Mikey Siegel, just think about Mikey Siegel. Otherwise, people who don't think about something else positive. So I think we're probably done with that time too. Let's see if there's a check.
Winning score 19.9 versus 19.6 male.
So you, like many meditators, if you had flipped that to the female, because the female and male algorithms are almost, but not exactly opposite, that would have been chosen the good one. So if you redo that now, we should probably do offline so we don't bore everyone. But if you want to redo that calibration with female, do it a couple times, my guess is it'll come out with the good. So just like most other meditators, my guess is you're better off with the female.
Huh. All right. Wow. That's very interesting.
Generally, I'm putting out a new update that I'm going to have a video in there that explains the calibration process and doesn't call the algorithms male and female, so people can just determine whether they're type 1 or type 2.
Uh-huh.
So there's no social pressure about which one is which.
Because nice.
Because I think some men would be like, well, I don't want to put it on female, and some women would be like, oh, I don't want to put it on male. It's confusing. And so, so I'm putting an update out about that. And hopefully that will encourage people to really decide which they are. Because there's really two types of people. I mean, there's these two algorithms, and some have these regularities that are like this, and some like this. And so
do you ever have anybody that's like balanced? It's kind of like...
It's pretty I think the correlation is pretty extremely negative between those. In other words, usually people are one or the other. Some people are both, but there's not a lot of people in the middle.
Nice. I noticed I really like the title of your book, Unfolding the Perpetual Science of Your Soul's Work.
Oh,
now, What is that about? I mean, I love the idea of unfolding. That feels like a wonderful metaphor for what goes on in spiritual, emotional work as we work on ourselves. And I like perpetual science. And then the word soul and science are often, contradictory. But here you're obviously a scientist, and yet you're talking about the unfolding of the soul. So you want to say a little bit about your work?
Yeah. So that book is about my passion. One of my passions in helping people understand that what science is about is not what drives scientists who are really passionate about their work is not the finding of facts. It's not, what will be the fact that I find, right? It's the process of discovery. Mm-hmm. That's the motivating thing. So in other words, the unknown is the lever that you're trying to court as a scientist. And it's naked nature. So it's trying to get nature to take off its clothes and show you its body parts, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so it's a romantic, passionate process that has nothing to do with what happens at the end. So finally nature takes off a little bit of the clothes, and then you're like, yeah, we'll take off something else. I mean, so there's never an end to it. So
I think you just birthed a lot of more scientists in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is that I think we're all scientists. In a way, if we approach our lives as if we're the scientists of our souls, if we're the scientists of discovering what is true for us, and not necessarily true for anyone else, but what is true for us, that is a very scientific way of approaching the world. So you do experiments in your life, and then you look at the results of those experiments. So that's what the book does, is it takes people through different experiments that they could do to find their own path around what helps them, the three stages of what I think the true scientific process, or the scientific process that scientists actually go through, I believe can be boiled down to a discover phase, a mastery phase, and a sharing phase. And so that's how the book is split up. So because we could do that with our lives as well. So the discovery phase.
That's great. Yeah, that's really, 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 I like that.
Yeah. So the discovery phase is like you're working. Then all of a sudden you're just working because you have faith that something's going to show up. And then all of a sudden you discover something and you're like, wait, this doesn't make sense, or this is unusual, or I'm surprised and I'm kind of excited and I want to follow it up. Then you go, wait, I got to be sure I get this. I got to be sure this observation is correct. I got to be sure I'm making the right experiments. I got to make sure I'm making the right analyses. I got to make sure that I'm thinking about this with other people who might know more about it. And so that's the mastery part. How can I really master this information and know that it's accurate and really work with it, instead of just saying, oh, look, isn't this neat? Because that's not really gratifying to say, isn't this neat? You want to develop this dance that's in relationship. I talk in the book about a dance with God. You want to say, well, I think it's this, but then you want to listen to what nature says or what God says back. If you're just saying, I think it's this, well, then you're just doing, in a way, philosophy, right? Which is like, or religion, which are fine, but that's not the same thing as doing science. Doing science, you ask a question and you listen to the answer and you change your opinion based on what the answer is, if you need to change your opinion. And so that's the mastery piece. And then the sharing piece is about, as a scientist, you take your ideas and you say, look, I've mastered it. I've discovered something. I've mastered it. And now I'm going to put it out in the world and share it. And hopefully it will do some good in the world. So the sharing piece in terms of the development of our soul is the same thing. So you get to the point in your life or through a particular process or project where you say, now I'm ready to come out into the world and sort of, as you said, become a transmitter of the particular piece of knowledge that I believe I've mastered. And then at other times you go right back to discovery. That's why it's perpetual. It's not like as soon as I've been able to master something and share it, then I'm mastering everything. No, you've just mastered that one thing,
Right.
That's why it's perpetual.
Yeah, that's George Washington Carver said in an interview, somebody asked him, how have you discovered so many things about so many things? And basically the answer, I'm paraphrasing, he said, well, if you give yourself in love to your subject, it will begin to reveal itself to you. And there's some kind of process that goes on that's revelatory as you pay attention and you listen, you ask the questions.
That's right. And so that translates to, in the process of being the scientist of your soul, that translates to giving yourself your soul love, right?
Yeah.
Giving your essence love. And it does reveal itself to you. And that's pretty much the only situation. It's not going to go around revealing itself to you if you're harsh on it.
Yeah, and then of course you've got to get out there and do it. I'm a songwriter and a musician, And I never knew if a song was never birthed until I sang it for somebody else. It wasn't just enough to have notebooks or recordings. It had to be played, and something in that circuit made it okay. Either it sucked or it didn't. And if it really was a good thing, then okay, I have this worked. So now I have another song.
I'm not sure that we even feel like we exist unless we have relationship with other people. I'm not sure that the human spirit exists in isolation.
Right. And I tend to be very introverted, believe it or not. And I always have to push myself to go out, into community and everything. When I do, I just, generally really blessed by it. It's a big breakthrough for me. They say that I think Jung said that God comes through the lesser function, and my kind of people, out there in the world is probably the lesser function. I'm more comfortable. I need lots of time to refill alone, doing my thing.
Yeah, you say that, what a cool thing to say. It's almost like it reminds me of Leonard Cohen's song Anthem, where he says, ring the bell that still can ring, forget the perfect offering, there's a crack in everything, it's where the light gets in.
Nice. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, that's cool. It's our vulnerability that helps us. Yeah.
And in the sharing and the giving, there's in the Gospel of Thomas, that was found in the Egyptian desert in 1945. A lot of scholars think it predates Mark. I mean, it's probably the earliest thing, and it's just a button. There's no stories. There's no resurrection miracles. It's somebody who's taking notes and writing these things down. And Jesus said, if you keep that within you inside, it'll kill you. But if you bring it forth, it'll give you life. So there's something in that process of giving that the circuit is completed and life happens.
So. Yeah, and I think you could tend to, it's similar with the noticing of the nature and listening. If you, as a scientist, if you just observe and then start going crazy on your theories and not doing experiments, you can get pretty delusional.
Yeah, you can spin out, create this whole universe that's not based on anything.
Yeah. It's not as, to me, it's not as fun. Because, being wrong is just as delightful as being right?
I'm an expert at that.
Me too.
By the way, I'm a super William James fan. I got that from your talk. And I had my first big spiritual experience, religious experience, whatever you want to call it, when I was 11. And my mom had a copy of William James. So when I was 11 years old, I was trying to find some explanation for what was going on. I was like getting a dictionary and trying to power my way through a variety of religious experience by William James. But he's always been a touchstone ever since I was like 11 years old.
Yeah, I don't know what his deal was, but whether you're in the world of religious philosophy or whether you're in the world of neuroscience or psychology, like it always comes back to William James, and he was practically always right. I mean, he couldn't have known that he was right. I mean, it's almost like he was a time traveler, even though that seems crazy.
Well, he was basically, I think, rejected by mainstream science and mainstream psychology, but he had this model of subjective science, phenomenology plus objective scientific process, and it just was beautiful, and we kind of forgot about it, but now, we're bringing it back, and I can see you doing that in your work too.
Yeah, I'm passionate about that, and Francisco Varela, Mind Life guy, is really passionate about that as well, and so I admire him for that, because he's a neuroscientist who really wants to bring the subjective and the objective together. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I would want to add is that I'm starting to create, think about and work with others to create and define a new field called transcendence technology. And that is about technology that is related to not simply to well-being, but about technology that is aware of and capable of moving people on a path to collective transformation, so self-transcendence, but also technology that helps us avoid the pitfalls that are known along that path and helps us gain the sort of inputs that we need along that path. So transcendence technology is, I think it's the wave of the future, and I think it's going to end up in a way replacing some of our more dogmatic or corrupt institutions, because people, regardless, need to have mystical experience. They need to connect with others. They need to have collective transformation. They need to have self-transcendence. But there is no actual, as far as I know, no actual human need to denigrate yourself or to decide that other person has power over you. So I think that creating technology that sort of gets rid of the pitfalls like that and supports the healthy process would be great. And I feel like Choice Compass is like an entry-level drug to that process. I love Choice Compass for myself and for other people, and I feel like it's absolutely an entry-level drug to give people an experience that their own body wisdom has something to say to them.
Right.
But once you're on that train, it opens up worlds, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
However you get on that train.
Brilliant. Yeah. And it's so right that transcendent is like, if it's just transcendent, you get into all kinds of problems. And it's like you need the non-dual, but you also have to clean up the relative side of the street. You know, you have to deal with your traumas and your emotions and your projections and your this and your that and your bad negative stories about yourself. Because if you don't, the whole transcendent thing gets channeled through this totally screwed up puppet, right? And the puppet spazzes out and does all kinds of things. Evil. So you need to identify with the puppet master and also, you know, clean up the puppet, for crying out loud. So it'll be a better puppet and it'll dance better and do what it's supposed to do on the stage.
Yeah, in a loving way.
So, right.
That's the only thing I would like to add. And I'm working with the Innovation Lab at the Institute of Noetic Sciences to do that. And I'm also working with the folks at Focus at Will, who provide music to keep people in a flow state in order to do that. And so I have various avenues to try to approach that. And anyone who's interested in that should let me know, because I'm sort of building a coalition of people. Yeah, this is a great project. I mean, you're really pulling together important pieces of information, and it's also a snapshot of how things are right now. And I think in about 10 years, things will be so different. People will look back at it as sort of a historical document of this revolution.
Yeah, well, it was all my wife's Pam idea. And the first time she mentioned me, I said, that sounds boring. So that was one of my specializing in being wrong. But anyway, but once I started showing up, I was like, whoa, this thing just gathered an energy and started a field it's just been really powerful. And Julia, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Javi.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Have a great day.